Hey y'all, it's Van Lufa here. Uh, Please excuse my greasy face while we talk. Okay, just giving an update on my granddaughter because people have asked, and so I was just gonna talk about that a little bit. So everybody knows my granddaughter has a condition called hypomyelinating leukodystrophy. It's a neuro a neurologic disease caused by from a gene mutation. And so she had to have surgery. So she has something that's called hypertonia in her arms and legs. Hyper meaning more or high, tonia tone. So she has got extremely high tone in her arms and her legs. So her arms and her legs can be really rigid, and she just has her arms outstretched and whatnot. So the hypertonia in her legs have caused her hips to come out of place, the femur that goes into the hip joint to come out of place, and that's from the pulling because her legs are so tight. A year ago she had a surgery called tendon lengthening, and it was a pretty non-invasive surgery, just two tiny little incisions kind of in on each of her groin areas to kind of stretch those muscles a little bit more so they're not pulling that hip out of place, right? So they were hoping, and it worked for a while, and they were really hoping to get longer out of that surgery than they did. But eventually, the hips start coming out of the sockets again. I don't know, I guess I'm trying to think of a, easier way to explain it. So Tuesday, she underwent a very invasive surgery. And in case you want to look it up or care, what she had was called a bilateral varus derotation osteotomy. So here's what they did. They took each femur bone on each side, and so kind of the way it's supposed to go is your femur kind of goes up and then curves a little bit and goes into that hip joint, right? And you kind of see the top of that femur kind of curved a little bit, like if you would look at an x-ray. Well, because of her tight muscles, it kind of pulled that femur out and it was more straight. So what they do is they go in, they take that femur bone, you cut a big chunk out of it at the top. So instead of being straight, they cut a big chunk out of it and then kind of rotate it and turn it like this and hold it like that with a plate and some screws and then put it back into the hip joint. It's just a more permanent way of getting her leg, the femurs back in her hips. And it gets so bad with her sometimes that her legs, like when she's sitting there, her legs can kind of cross. And or when she's sitting there, like if this is her foot and you're laying there, her foot was kind of rotated like this because her hip was out of joint. So all of that to say, she had that fixed on Tuesday. It was a lot more invasive than what we had imagined. And, so she went in and had that. A lot of kids most kids that have that surgery have an epidural. And she was supposed to have an epidural for 3 to 4 days for pain control. But because of the placement of the cast, it had to go up higher than they thought originally. They couldn't put an epidural in her. So she ended up being on a pain pump, or like a PCA pain pump, getting Dilaudid, Toradol, Tylenol, and then Valium for muscle spasms, because that's a real thing after these kinds of surgeries, and she's had them. So she came out with the cast from like mid-torso down to her ankles. It's a spica cast, so it's the one where the legs are spread out and there's a bar in between. She has to have that for 4 weeks. So she came out with that. She came out with what are called Jackson Pratt drains, or JP drains, in right near the hips. So there were actually drains in her legs that were draining out blood, because it's a very, very bloody surgery. In fact, most kids need blood transfusions, but she didn't. She had a Foley catheter in. And yeah, that was it. I mean, hell, that was enough. So that first night was Tuesday night was really, really, really rough. Nobody really slept much. And then yesterday morning, she kind of started getting better pain control because, they have to kind of tweak everything, because different doses and different frequencies and all of that work different, for other people. So they had to kind of tweak it a little bit, but they finally found that sweet spot, late yesterday morning. And so she did okay. PT came in and saw her and kind of showed mom and, like how to reposition her and things like that. They come in every 2 hours and reposition her, which is wonderful. And so that was yesterday. She had an okay day. Then today, and she'd had an okay day enough that they said they were going to try her on just regular pain medicine that goes through her G tube instead of the IV stuff. Because, we need to get her off of all that. So today they did that. They transitioned her to medication in her G tube, or what would be like oral medication for somebody who can, swallow things. So she did that. They took her Foley catheter out. The PT came. They got her in the wheelchair. So they wanted to make sure that the wheelchair that she has, that we have, would be safe and everything with her big spica cast. So they got her all situated in there. They propped her legs up with a pillow and just took her for a little ride around the floor there at the hospital. So I'm sure she loved it. The drains came out today. The Foley catheter finally came out today. So she's making progress. The only real setback today, well, I guess there was a couple of them. The only real setback today is that she started running a fever this morning, which they said is very common with kids with this surgery. There was no concern. Her heart rate was really high, but that was more than likely from the fever. Anytime you run a fever, your system kind of speeds up and your heart races, And so that was, I'm sure, related to the fever. And it did come down then as the fever broke, and she never did run another fever. Her hemoglobin was up today, 1 whole point from yesterday, so no blood transfusion was needed. And so they're kind of on their way. So it sounds like tomorrow PT is going to come in. They just need to evaluate her car seat to make sure that she will fit in there comfortably and safely. And if everything goes good, she'll come home tomorrow. The only problem we're having with her is we need to have a bowel movement. And she hasn't had one. Well, my daughter said she had a little tiny, tiny one earlier today, but didn't amount to anything. But otherwise she hadn't had one since, I don't know, like Monday or Tuesday. So that's a problem. So they're currently handling that situation, and hopefully that will be resolved. So, and as you know, Dilaudid is an opioid. Opioids, one of the most common side effects. I mean, there are lots, but something that happens with a lot of people is it causes constipation. And so that's about anybody can get that with opioids. So anyway, that is the update on my precious grandbaby. And she's actually probably handling it better than all of us. I was a little disappointed because I didn't get to go to the hospital at all and see her. I mean, I shouldn't say that. I went with my daughter to take her, and I went with her into pre-op. But then once Dad got there, I had to leave, and they're not allowing any visitors yet. So I've been home for 3 days, just on my own because I couldn't go visit. But I have a feeling that when they get home tomorrow, I'll be taking care of her tomorrow night because they're all exhausted. But anyway, just to give you an update, she is doing well. This is going to be a long recovery, but it should be worth it in the end. Thank you, everybody, for all of your prayers, all of your thoughts, and, just being there for me. I really appreciate it. Anyway, I'm going to wrap it up and go to bed. Thank you guys so much for watching, and I'll see you on the next one. Bye.